All right, set up all the notes. Okay, here we go. So, what is a perfect square again? It's where you can take the square root of this guy right here. So, if I take the square root of 16, I get 4. If I take the square root of x squared, I get x. If I multiply these two together and double that, okay, so now we need to double it. Okay, so we're going to double it. We get 8x. 8x is the middle term, right? So this is definitely a perfect square trinomial, and it factors to, you take the square root of the first term, you take the square root of the constant, and you write them, where am I going to put it? Put it right over here. It factors to x plus 4 squared, if you know that it's a perfect square trinomial. So what would it take, like if we didn't see the 16 sitting there, okay, what would it take to figure out what number needs to be there to have a perfect square trinomial? So this process that I'm going to show you, it is based on this idea right over here that we know fairly well. And it's going to create a perfect square trinomial. So here's the first thing you do. You take half of the 8. All right, so you take half of the coefficient of that linear term, of the middle term. Okay, so half of 8 is 4. All right, then you take 4 and you square it. So now we're going to go 4 squared. And that is the number that belongs right there. So completing the square is pretty darn easy, right? I mean, that's all you do. You take half the middle term's coefficient, you square it, and that's the constant. Now, why does that work? Why are we taking half of 8? Well, do you remember how we, like the last thing we did is we doubled the 4x to check to see if we had that middle term, right? 8x. It's because when you have a perfect square, you're going to have two of those middle terms after you expand this. You're going to have two of those middle terms that are identical to each other. So we want to take half of that. In other words, we want to get back to the half mark, if you will. And we're ignoring the x, right? So like half of 8 is 4. And then if you had the 4, remember where the 4 came from? It was the square root of this number right over here. So why are we squaring it? Well, we need to have a number here so that when I take the square root, I get a new number. And then when I double that new number, I get the middle term, right? So we're kind of undoing that process. We're taking half of the middle term's coefficient, and then we're squaring it. That's all there is to it. Okay, so let's try problem number 1 right now. And here's what problem number 1 looks like. And by the way, where do you find problem number 1? Well, I attached it to today's assignment. So it looks like this right here: x squared plus 26x plus c. So what they're saying is, let's find that constant on the end. Let's find the c value that would make this a perfect square. Okay, so let me put that down: x squared plus 26x plus c. And you would copy this into your notebook, right? Just like this. And oh shoot, I forgot my x in there. Let me put my x in there. So 26x plus c. And then I want to make sure I've copied it down correctly. Yes, perfect. All right, so now what do? We take half of the 26. So half of 26 is 13. Now I take 13 and I square it. That gives me 169. That goes right there for our c value. So you could just put down c equals. Now, it doesn't ask us to factor it, but if we did have x squared plus 26x plus 169, it factors to x plus 13 squared. So completing the square is not difficult, all right? How can it be helpful in solving a quadratic equation? That part isn't very difficult either, okay? The first thing we would look at is we'd say, well, is this the correct number sitting right here? And it's definitely not. And there's a couple of reasons why it's not. This number over here is going to be a positive number because we want to be able to take the square root of it. And right now I can't take the square root of negative 16. Another reason it's not the right number is, what's half of 6? Okay, let's go through the process here. What's half of 6? 3. If I square 3, that's my next step, right? So there's 2 steps to this. Step 1, half middle term. Half middle term. All right, step 2, square. So we're going to square it. All right. And that's what I'm doing right now. I'm squaring it and I get 9. Okay. So I know a positive 9 needs to be sitting here. So when we're using this process to solve a quadratic, here's the first thing I would do. I would check to make sure that's, you know, that's not the right number. If 99% of the time, this number sitting here is not the right number. So we're going to move the 16 to the other side by addition. So I'm going to get that 16 out of there and move it to the right side. And so now I've got x squared plus 6x. And then I've got like a little blank here. And then I've got a 16 on the right side. Now I just figured out the number that does belong there. Okay, let me put like little attention. Look here, right? I just figured out 9 needs to be there. So I'm going to put a 9 right in this spot, but I can't add 9 to the left side and keep an equation that's the same as the other equation that I started with, right? I started with this equation. I just added 9 to the left side. So I got to add 9 to the right side to keep everything the same as the original equation or equivalent. It may look different, but it's still equivalent to the first equation. Now I have a perfect square right here, perfect square trinomial. And so I go x plus 3 quantity squared. Remember, it's the square root of the first term, or the square root of the first term, square root of the last term. Those are the two terms in our binomial down here that's being squared. And then let's see, we got 25 on the other side. All right, let's keep going. We're trying to solve this thing. Solving means get the x by itself. So how can this be useful? We're going to use it to solve. Use it to solve. And solve means get x all by itself, right? That's what that means. Get x by itself. Okay, so here we go. I'm almost there. I've got to take the square root of both sides. So I'm going to take the square root of the left side. And when I take the square root of something squared, a perfect square, I get its square root. So the square root of 25, I take the square root of 25 and I get 5. I take the square root of x plus 3 squared and I get x plus 3. Now, you got to remember that it's a little tricky. When you're taking the square root of both sides here, we're going to get a plus or minus involved. Remember that? So let's put a plus minus down, meaning we get 2 answers on the right side. So now really I have 2 equations, and you might think, oh, geez, this is not easy. I've got 2 equations. Well, these 2 equations are easy, right? So we got x plus 3 equals 5, and we have x plus 3 equals negative 5. So here we go. I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides, and I get x equals 2. I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides. Got to be careful with the negatives here. X equals negative 8. So I get 2 answers. And if I was to graph this original equation right here, like y equals, I would see that when y is 0, the x's are 2 and negative 8. In other words, I've got 2 x-intercepts, okay? You're going to try one right now. So when I look at the assignment, number 10 is one that we have to do. And I just copied down number 10 right here, okay? So that's one of your homework problems. Number 11 is another one we got to do. So let's go over here and copy 11 down. X squared minus 2x minus 14. So here we go. X squared minus 2x minus 14 equals 0. Step 1, move the 14 to the other side. And let me pause for a second. I want you to put the video on pause. You try number 11, then come back and watch it. All right. So I move the 14 to the other side to get it out of there. And I'm going to leave like a little blank right there. And so we got minus 2x there. We got an x squared over here. Take half of negative 2. Half of negative 2 is negative 1. I square negative 1. Okay, that's my step 2. So like step 1's here, step 2's here. When I square negative 1, I get positive 1. 1 needs to be the number sitting right here. So let's put right there plus 1. It's always going to be a plus here. We're going to add 1 to the other side to keep it the same equation or something equivalent to that equation. And now I have a perfect square trinomial. This is the way I want it. It factors to x minus 1 quantity squared. So, man, I hope I'm making this clear. Why is it minus 1 right there? Well, it's the same sign as this. It's a negative. And it's the square root of that last term. Or you could think about it as half of the middle term, right? Like I could take half of that 6. That's the number that's going to be sitting right there, right? All right. So That's all equal to 15. Okay, we're not done yet. We got to take the square root of both sides. So I'm going to kind of put it like this. X minus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 15. Okay. And then if it wants a decimal approximation, you would go to Desmos and type in the square root of 15. But you could leave it as exact, just like this. Watch, I'm going to add 1 to both sides. And because this is a rational number and this is an irrational number, you can't really combine them together. They're not like terms, more or less. And I get 1 plus or minus square root of 15. Boy, that answer right there looks beautiful. If you're typing it in McGraw-Hill, then you'd want to get a decimal approximation and round to whatever they tell you to round to. So I am going to put this into McGraw-Hill so that you can check your answers immediately. You can type them in and see what the right answers are. But as I'm setting this homework up, you're going to do 1 through 5, 7, 9 through 15, 22 through 24. And it's from this like document here. So it's, when you look at it, these numbers here aren't necessarily going to match up perfectly for what you're typing into McGraw-Hill to check your answers. So you do have to be a little careful, right? Because I'm skipping some of the problems here. Like when I look over here, I'm not doing 1 through whatever 15. If there's 15 questions here, I'm skipping number 6. So in McGraw-Hill, it's going to number 7 as number 6, and it'll number 9 as I think number 7, right? So the numbering is going to get off a little bit, but you will find the same exact problems like number 11. You'll find it in McGraw-Hill. Just make sure you're typing your answers in the right place if that's what you're doing with McGraw-Hill. All right. Thanks for watching my video. I'm going to have an advanced video for those students that feel like they're really advanced for the last few problems on homework. Don't feel like you need to do the last, I think, 3 problems. It's only for those students that feel like, man, I get all this is easy. I want something more challenging. Thanks for watching.